Why is it so important to innovate as a business and to continuously change? What are the type of people that you need in your business, and what type of culture do you need to ultimately be successful? Today, I'm so excited to invite Thomas Ramstad all the way from Norway for another beautiful podcast episode for Leadership Lyrics. And today, we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the story of Blackberry and looking at innovation and change. So, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me. I know that both of us watched that Blackberry movie, and while I was watching it, I was even sending you messages. And I just wanted to frame the story a little bit. So, Blackberry started, it was a group of techies, and they suddenly noticed a gap in the market that no one in Canada were actually tapping into the free Wi-Fi that was available. And they decided to actually create a cell phone that was a mini computer. So they were the very first people that wanted to put a keyboard on a cell phone to allow you to first do emails and messaging. So in the movie, there's that moment where they're meeting with a potential buyer that can open the doorway for them. What do you think went wrong, Thomas? Why did they not get that sale at the start? What are things that they did wrong?
I think the most important thing with the whole story is that you had some great techie guys that actually had some great ideas and they were fiddling around. Yeah, they were actually, producing modems. This was sort of something they did on the side and having fun. And they were not talking to any marketing guys or girls. They were not talking to sales. They were not even talking to the customers. They just thought this was a great idea. So I think that is, the number one key takeaway for why this actually failed.
I totally agree with you. And for me, what was so frustrating in that meeting, coming from a presentation coaching experience, is the guy had beautiful layout of slides that they literally had on this canvas for the pitch, but he was reading, he had a script and he was reading from these cue cards. So he had no persuasive language. So that's like really a gap of even knowing your own product and having a marketing or salesperson that can guide you to actually pitch it in the right way. You were speaking about the modems now. I know that there was a certain modem deal that fell through, and what did they do wrong there?
Well, they had, contract, but they had the stock in-house. But the customers, they didn't actually buy the modems and they didn't get any cash at all. So
So
total failure.
ultimately, is it a good idea to manufacture all of your products without getting any deposits in place and ensuring that the client's actually reliable and that they will pay you? So maybe not actually manufacturing everything before expecting payment. So were they maybe too trustworthy?
I'm not quite sure whether it was a sort of phony move to get them out of the market or whether this was a real business deal. So we can only speculate. But yes, if you don't get a deposit and you don't stack up thousands and thousands of your product, just wait and see for some time. Get the money. Money is the king.
Let's just progress with the story a little bit. So ultimately, a sales guy then joined the organization, and he actually had to bankroll his own house in order to pay salaries and to keep the business afloat. And then he started very strategically selling to people, and he said that they needed to get a minimum viable product, so a cell phone in place that they could actually show people. How important is that when you innovate that you don't just stick with the idea, but show people something physically?
It's really important. Tesla did the same thing. They actually made a car and they just glued the things together and used gaffer tape. And yeah, it was just horrible. But actually, seeing is believing. And it doesn't have to go for 700 kilometers, but actually just make something. It might not be pretty, but it's important for everyone to actually see your idea actually works.
We spoke about the first mover advantage, and you almost call it the first mover disadvantage. So,
Yes.
like, why is it sometimes important or a good idea to be the first man on the moon, the first people in space, the cell phone that has email capability or keyboard like they had, and where can it actually become a disadvantage?
Well, it's very expensive, to be the first mover. You have to do all the areas. You have to, for example, come up with all the technology. You have to investigate the market. You have to sell to the customers. Many times you have to educate the customers. And the second mover, you can learn, you can jump the steps, when it comes to innovation, and you can jump the steps when it comes to marketing, and you can tap into all the areas that, the first mover made. It might not be a first mover advantage, it might be first mover disadvantage. And it is costly many times. We can look at Tesla. They were a first mover, and a lot of people enjoyed buying a Tesla. But now they're not on the leaderboard because all the other producers of electrical vehicles are catching up, and China is going to be a big one. And then we have all the other movers as well, India and all the other countries and producers.
So I'm basically hearing that if you can learn from the mistakes of others, you will actually be able to get much further, but you then have to have that innovative growth mindset, which gets me to my next question, and you've just spoken about it as well. So there's a thing called the S curve in innovation, where I only recently heard about it when a fellow speaker spoke about it, where they said most companies will get to a point of saturation. And I think with the example of Blackberry, they reached that point of saturation. They had the biggest market share of mobile phones in the market because they were that first mover. But then because they didn't innovate, they actually saturated at that point where company like Apple, that has always been remarkable on innovation themselves and have been a front runner in computers for many years, then basically applied maybe some of that technology on the cell phone, learned from the mistakes of BlackBerry, and innovated and jumped the S curve themselves to actually take a lot of market share away from BlackBerry. What do you think would have worked better for BlackBerry, that when Apple came out with the iPhone and when Apple came out with the iPod, which was even before that, in the film you actually see they were at those launches. They saw what was happening, but what did they do wrong in that regard that tripped them over?
Apple is a great company and they made phones, and it's the same with, for example, Tesla. But Apple, though a lot of people perceive Apple as a producer of the hardware, the phone, they are probably not a phone manufacturer. What they are actually doing is that they're making software.
Yes.
They're making software. You have apps, and they are actually producing and delivering content for streaming. And there's the same thing with Amazon as well. They were delivering books. Now they are, a global player when it comes to expedition and delivery and logistics. And they have cloud services as well. They are also delivering streaming content. So what they are delivering is content and software. And the same with Tesla. They are producing and developing a lot of software. The car is just a container, sort of. It's the same with BlackBerry. They were really into hardware and developing the actual phone and forgot a bit about software and the user experience and what the customers wanted. And it's the same with Microsoft as well. They had a Windows phone and they made a great phone. I loved it, but they forgot about the apps and software, unfortunately.
I love what you're saying, that what people think on the surface a company sells is often very different. And Apple was able to keep on innovating, and where the focus has been more on software. And like you say, the phone or the computer or whatever can be the container, like in the same case of Tesla. A long time ago, when Simon Sinek first came out with his starting with why thing, he spoke about Apple, from a wide perspective, they're a very innovative company and that they're all about creating that magical customer experience, and that it's very much their core values, I think, has to do with design and making it, I would almost say, making it sexy. And that's where, when their sexy iPhone came out and it took away the bulky keyboard of Blackberry, they snuck in through the side door and took all of that market share away from Blackberry to eventually have zero market share.
Yeah.
So, how important is it for people in any business industry to know what others are doing and to keep on top of trends and keep on changing and growing themselves so that others don't cripple your business like what happened with BlackBerry and Apple?
I think a strategy is not about being best. Strategy is about being different. And that's why it's important to actually be different. And that's really important because let's say you have an athlete and he or she is going to run 100 meters. So you have 100 meters. That's this distance. You can't change that. And you have to run it as fast as you can. But what you can do is you can do your training differently, because you can do the weights, you can do technique, all those things you can do differently. And then hopefully you might end up number one. So because those things results in you being best because you did things differently. I think it's really important for not only people on social media, LinkedIn, everything. You don't have to be best. You have to be different. You have to
Love
tell
that.
your story.
Love that. Have that
Uh,
as a differentiation
yes.
strategies.
Yeah.
Like, what is your unique selling point? What actually
Yes.
makes you different?
And you have to find that spark instead of actually trying to make your spark better than anybody else. Just find your spark, and that's the most important thing.
I love that. I want to pivot slightly, Thomas. So we've spoken a lot about innovation and change, and I wanted to speak about the human element and the culture element of that company. So I laughed out loud when I saw the techies at the beginning, and I don't know if they were dressed 70s or 80s, but they had these headbands. It was probably more 80s. When they were starting off, me and my husband joked and said, wow, look at these small offices where they were selling modems. And once BlackBerry took off, it was these massive offices, and you could really see they were driving in at the offices. You could see there was this warehouse, there's a security guard. This is really not a small company anymore. But when I looked at where they started off, they were having these movie nights that had like a nice culture where they would watch movies. And I was quite shocked when they started paying all of these top end people from for Google, different places, 10 million each, which they didn't even have money for, to come and give advice. And then you notice that no one in the office was being productive. They were literally having these movie nights, which they once had. So, how important is culture in a business, and how important is it to almost like grow up in your business? Should things be different from a startup to now you're actually a front runner in an industry?
I think culture changes. Yes, it does. It needs to as well, because when you realize that you have success, when your technology can't keep up with the growing number of customers or the growing number of sales, then we're back to a sort of a mock-up, something that you show. And that's really important, because if you want money, if you want investors to come along, you have to show them something. But that is what you show, your mock-up sort of, is not what you're going to found your business on. It's not going to be your foundation for the rest of the business. You have to evolve. And so sometimes the best thing is to just throw it away. Sometimes you can take some parts and build on it. But many times it's also best to just throw it away. So yes, culture has to change as well. I think the most important thing to actually build a culture that encourages innovation, because I think that innovation is not what you see as a customer, and what you see on the outside is a giant leap or a new product, but Innovation is just small steps every day, done by all those magnificent people in your company, small steps. You want to make all these people and all these squads and teams, and you want them to thrive. So you want to make them autonomous, and you want to give them a vision and a mission and something to actually work towards. You talk about psychological safety. I think that's one of the most important things, because in a group, you have to be able to feel safe. And now we talk about feelings, that we shouldn't hurt people, and people are very afraid saying the wrong things. We are actually becoming afraid of words. And it's when you have an environment, you have a group, and it's not about being mean to people, but sometimes you get heated arguments or whatever, and it should be about the case, what we are actually discussing, and not focusing on people. And that's psychological safety, that I can say this, and I, for example, disagree, and it's not about you, it's about the idea. I don't like the idea because this and this and this. And if you have an environment that actually encourages that, then you will have people working together and agreeing and disagreeing, and then people will come up with good ideas and they work together, and then you will end up with innovation.
I love that. So don't make it about the people, focus on the outcome and the goal. Create a safe
Yes.
space where people can have healthy debate, so that you're actually focusing on the outcome. You're not scared to speak about something because you're scared you're walking on eggshells. It's actually about, everyone knows that it's about the success, the growth, and the sustainability of the business.
Toyota had this for many years, where anyone can stop the production line. If they see an error, a flaw, they have a suggestion for improvement, they can stop the production line. They talk about it, and they say, okay, that's a good idea, that's a bad idea, let's think about it, okay, and then they start up the production again. But that actually encourages everybody to come up with a good idea. It's not like you're being harassed, or now you stop the production, what are we going to do now? We're supposed to produce 5 cars every 10 minutes. So that encourages innovation. That encourages those small steps. People think, come up with ideas, and that encourages innovation.
So if there was any practical steps for the leaders that are listening that they could apply in their business, if they want to have more of a innovative culture, if they want to deal with change better, what practical advice, maybe even just 1 or 2 things that you would give them?
I think it's really important to build psychological safety, sort of the net, where you have an environment that encourages people to speak up. And the other thing is, put people in small teams, focus on the outcome, let the people fix the problem, or come up with ideas. You've hired intelligent, well-educated, capable people. Give them a mission. I'll tell them about the beacon or the lighthouse and the outcome, and just let them work.
This is so helpful, Thomas. So creating that psychological safety, having small teams that's really focused on that beacon of hope or outcome that they want, and really creating a culture, like you were saying, where people can speak up, where they can debate, where it's actually about getting the results that they want. I just want to end off with something. Just going back to the Blackberry movie, while watching the movie, I kept on thinking of the book Who Moved My Cheese, where there's an example of the little people who at a stage they become greedy and they become lazy and they just get stuck at Cheese Station C. And where they used to go out finding new routes and putting on their shoes and remaining fit, like you were saying, doing the little steps, the discipline every day, they were just entitled. They were like, we have the money now. We were the first mover. Everything will be fine. We have cheese, enough cheese for forever. So we can have movie nights. We don't have to work hard. We're set for life. That was kind of the attitude. And suddenly, when the iPhone came out and that market share got taken away from them, they were in such a sense of denial. They were fighting with their customers. They said there's no way that Apple will take business away from them. And ultimately, I just want to end off with, when we're looking at navigating change, and you dealing with your people or with a client are going to go through those phases. Almost the phases of grief is similar to the phases of change, and they'll go through denial, anger, and ultimately when they go through that dip, you want to get them through the dip very quickly to that place of acceptance. And if you're not willing to accept that the change has not happened and what are you going to do about it, nothing will change. And I felt like they never got to that place of acceptance, and they didn't, like you were saying, listen to people out in the market. So if you want to innovate, you need to keep on having focus groups with your clients and try to see if there are new trends, or are there things that you're not aware of because you have tunnel vision and you're only seeing this part of the pie, and how can you actually make it bigger so that you can innovate through other people's perspectives.
Exactly. That's a good story. And if you have this tunnel vision, you don't see the change and you don't actually realize that we need to do some discovery here. We actually need to go out and talk to people and discover new things. And yeah, that's a bad idea. Then you will literally, fail.
Definitely. Just the last few words. When I was part of a Lego case study, when they were looking at a turnaround strategy for Lego, actually came in where at a stage they were not listening to what the customers were saying to them. And when they started actually having proper focus groups, they realized there was a big market with girls and adults that they'd never tapped into.
Yep.
So sometimes you could actually be surprised at the new target audiences you identify and adapting to their needs as well. Thank you for joining me today, Thomas. We'll have another one soon.